Hello, Relatable community. This is your host, Teresa Freeman. Today, I speak with Greg Amori, a very dear friend. I've known him for most of my life. Greg is the director of civilian agencies at CrowdStrike. Greg has been successful in the IT space for a long time. However, it wasn't entirely an easy road to get there. After dropping out of college, he found some success in the broker and trading business, although that was pretty short-lived. And then he worked as a bartender, which he says was a great learning environment for his now successful career in IT. He shares how and why being uncomfortable is so important for growth and how getting curious about things outside of his own interest has helped him to be a better version of himself. Thanks so much to Greg and enjoy this episode. Welcome to Relatable. This is Teresa Freeman. I'm here with Greg Amori, a good friend of mine, and the director of civilian agencies at CrowdStrike. Thank you so much for coming. I've been asking you to be on here for so long, probably since its inception, because I feel like you're someone who embodies a lot of the things that I want to talk about with people in terms of their path and how they've pivoted throughout their life and navigated their career. I feel like it's never a straight path, and there's sometimes a prescribed way of how people can be successful. And I'm here to sort of dispel that myth and break down some barriers with that. So I really appreciate you being here. I know you're super busy and you're doing me a huge favor by doing this.
I really appreciate you having me on.
Sure you do.
I hope your listener or viewer enjoys this.
Yeah, exactly. They will now. Now we'll like multiply our audience by like a bazillion. All right, so the first place I want to start with you, we'll get to your current role, and I like to talk a little bit about a day in the life, right, in terms of what you do at CrowdStrike. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about you in terms of when you were graduating from high school and what you thought your future looked like, or where you were in that moment in terms of where you were headed. Okay. So just talk a little bit about who you were at that time and what was going on.
So I don't think I had much of a clue. I went to college to hopefully play baseball. I didn't get into very many places. I was a terrible student in high school. I think I graduated, I don't know, close to the bottom of my class, like a C average or something like that. So, it's not like I got a whole bunch of acceptances. Yeah. I was like 1090 SAT or something like that. I might even be lying there. It might have been lower, but padded a little bit. But,
history,
Yeah, just a typical aimless kind of teenager, product of divorced parents and, just not a lot of direction. So I got to college, wasn't good enough to play baseball in college, so ended up... and I didn't really have any motivation to study one thing or another, so I'd started studying business. Yeah. At first, and then pretty much for the next year and a half, kind of partied my way through school, and then right after my first semester sophomore year, yeah, my dad drove down and said, "Hey, I want to take you to lunch." I'm like, "Oh, that's great," and so he drives up, and so we're heading to lunch, and he hands me these pamphlets. And I look at them, and it says, it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And I'm like, what is this? He's like, well, I thought we'd go grab a bite to eat, and then we could go by the recruiter's office, because you're not good at school, you're not playing baseball, and I'm not paying for this anymore. So, by the way, I already told him I'm not paying for it, so you're done at the end of the semester, kind of thing.
Wow.
So,
how that hit you then?
Like a ton of bricks. Yeah. Can I swear?
Sure.
Okay. So like a good kick in the ass, you know? Like, looking back, I wish I actually had gone and done, one of the armed forces. I didn't do that. I ended up moving back up to Northern Virginia area and, kind of working, doing different things.
Let me ask you something just about the being an athlete and also I've known you for so long, and you were someone that was always really popular, had a lot of friends. I would say you were, how do I say this? Like you were someone that like, that like, you know, girls were always like, had crushes on you, right? You were someone that was like very, I would say like successful in terms of like high school life, right? And so would you say that to go from that, and I could be like projecting what I thought of you then versus what your experience was.
Yeah, you are.
That's what it looked like from the outside, like a guy that kind of had it together, good looking guy, a lot of friends, right? Of course. Yeah. And then to go, were you recruited there or were you a walk-on, like in terms that you were walk-on?
I tried out for fall ball.
Yeah.
It was NAI school, it's High Point University.
Yeah.
So they had a fall ball. So I tried out for that and it just wasn't good enough.
And so if that was my view of you, like when you got there, and does that kind of fall apart? Like you don't have that nucleus of support, or the thing you thought you were good at now wasn't, or was it more a maturity thing? Do you think like you just got there and it wasn't the right time yet?
I think it's a maturity thing. So I completely disagree with you on
really
on the high school thing. Like, you know, so you know, I went to school in Virginia, and then we moved to Mexico, and I graduated from school in Mexico City. My time in school in Virginia, I hated. I mean, my parents were going through a divorce. There was a lot of drama, you know. Yeah. I was lashing out in a lot of different ways, you know, in those first 3 years. The move to Mexico was great. It was like a fresh start kind of thing. I didn't, you know, I had some decent friends in high school. You know, I remember fondly, obviously. But then when I got to Mexico, I really made some other good friends there. And I kind of wasn't, I don't know, acting out. It wasn't like rebelling kind of thing, right? It was just like, okay, let me just get through this. And
were you sad to go to Mexico? Like, was that like, did you see that as a reset, or was it? Because that's hard. Like you were, it was after your freshman year, right? So
I left after my junior year.
Oh,
yeah.
So
no.
Yeah.
So
that was her.
Yeah, well, so it was my mom and my younger sister who were going to go down to Mexico, and I thought, okay, well, they can't go down there by themselves, right? That would make sense. I would have had an opportunity, I guess, to go with my dad at that point, but I kind of wanted to go down. I thought it was a good idea.
Saw it for the experience too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're at High Point. The pamphlet lunch says he's not gonna pay for that anymore. You come back here, and then how long? And tell us a little bit about that period of time in terms of for you. I also think about this for people. I suspect you're seeing your peers moving on to other things and graduating from colleges and getting jobs, and tell me what that's like for you in terms, because you found like you're in bartending and like you probably made really good money, right? So that, you tell me just a little bit about that time period before you.
Yeah, so I mean, fortunately, I supported parents, or my mom anyway at the time. So I moved in with my mom, and I remember it was like,
shout out to Shirley, we love you.
Yeah. I was probably 19, I think 20 maybe, at that point. I don't want to live with your mom, right? Kind of thing. But I moved in, and then I got a job with Pan Am, if you remember that. Like,
yes.
It was a weird.
Vaguely.
Anyway, so I went and worked at Pan Am like part-time, went to Nova part-time.
Like airlines.
Yeah. Like I was, I spoke Spanish a little bit, so they put me in these kind of roles where I was helping, you know, Spanish speakers or whatever. And I did a bunch of different things. It was kind of a cool experience. Cool part is you fly everywhere for free, right?
Yeah.
So that was fun. I did that for like a year, all the while going to school and paying for school at Nova, taking classes, stuff like that. And then I'm at lunch one day and I'm reading the Wall Street Journal. Don't ask me why I was reading the Wall Street Journal. It was just like...
Is that a common occurrence?
It was back then. I was always interested in the market and things like that. Like I had no money, but I was always interested in it. So I was always trying to like look at things and read what I could or whatever. So it was kind of a common occurrence. There's a lady sitting at the same place where I'm having lunch, and she comes up and she's like, "Oh, you like the Wall Street Journal?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You know, what do you do?" I go, "I work at Pan Am." She goes, "You know, are you interested in the stock market?" I'm like, "Yeah, I always have been." Blah blah blah. Right? So one thing led to another, and she invites me to go interview for this role for the order entry person, so brokers got the trades. This doesn't happen anymore, but brokers got the trades and they put them on, they used to write out slips and bring them to them, and then you put buy or sell order and whatever exchange it was. And so I interviewed for it and I could type, and it was like, it was a glorified, order admin or order entry person. That's all it was. But it was in the game, kind of, so to speak, right? So, and then they sponsored me for my Series 7, which is their license to sell stocks. So I went and did that, and I failed it my first time, passed it the second time, and then I went to, I got my license, and then they kind of moved me into this sales role, right? We pick up the phone and dial in. And right then is when we went to war the first time in Iraq, right? So equity markets kind of went out. There was nothing going on there. So I started bartending at night because I was making no money.
Right.
And so
that kind of job, is it commission based? Like if you,
Yeah. So I got a job bartending, and it was like 2 nights a week, and then it was 3 nights a week, then it was 4 nights a week, and then I'm showing up late from work and stuff like that because we get done at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and had to be in 8 a.m. the next day. Right. So I said, okay, enough of this. I was having so much more fun and making money in bartending, so that kind of pivoted me to that, which was, I look back at that, it was an amazing experience. Just in terms of looking across the bar and being able to read people and understanding them and human nature and all those different things.
You mean bartending was an amazing experience? Yeah, huge life lesson of
you're introduced to so many different walks of life. It's like you get people from everywhere, colors, creeds, whatever. And they come in, and so sometimes you have the opportunity to engage them and talk to them and whatever.
Would you say that you are social, in terms of it comes easy to you? Would you be characterized as an extrovert, do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think I'm an extrovert. I think I'm more of an introvert. I like engaging. That's the best part of my job.
Yeah.
Right? I like to meet new people, and I like to solve problems, kind of thing. Yeah. But you put me into a group or a crowd of people, and it's not like I'm the life of the party or anything like that. Yeah. It takes work to then go out and make small talk and do those things. Yeah. So interesting. And I think as a bartender, you're also kind of in control of the dynamic, right? Exactly. So you can decide who you want to talk to, and you can decide where that's going to go. And you hit the nail on the head. You're in control, right? Yeah. So you have the ability to spend 30 seconds or 3 minutes with somebody, right? And it's an easy excuse. Oh, let me go do this, or I have to go do this, or whatever, and you can come back and forth as you kind of see fit.
So then, when you're now doing that more full time and you're making good money, that's hard to want to change that, I'm guessing.
It was, yeah. So I did that for 3 years, a bunch of different places. You get into that mode. What was that movie with Tom Cruise where that's it. Yeah. So where the days get shorter and shorter. It's like, okay, you're waking up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, kind of thing. It's like, oh, I've got a couple hours before I have to go to work. Right. So.
And then there's something I was going to ask you about that period of time. But what then triggered a move for you to go back to school?
Well, you brought it up earlier, right? So as I'm doing this, my peers are graduating college or going to grad school or going to law school or whatever, and starting their careers, right? And there was a little bit of that, peer pressure, if you will, and that's probably the most positive peer pressure you can get.
Right.
A little bit of FOMO, right? You want to keep up with the Joneses a little bit, I think, was probably my mentality back then. And so I said, but I also made the conscious choice, I got to start using my brain, right? I think I'm better than this, than what I'm doing right now. I think I can, I could do more than this, right? And I love bartenders, and I know bartenders I bartended with who are still bartending, right? And they're great at their jobs, and they've dialed it in,
For you though, there was something else that you wanted, something different, and to use your brain in a different way.
Yeah.
And would you say that from a confidence perspective, I'm curious about this with you, like in terms of going back and pursuing education, or thinking about yourself in the context of being able to be successful in a conventional way, right? Mm-hmm. That isn't sort of like in the ways that you had been previously. Were you at all like worried about that? Like what was your confidence level going into that? Or at that point, because you had been through enough, did you feel like you because it was on your terms and you knew you were ready, was that less of an issue? It
was less of an issue because one, I always had this great fallback, right? Like, okay, worst case scenario, I go back to bartending, and that's my lot in life, right? I'm gonna be a bartender. And I always knew there'd be, even while I was bartending, like I started a business called Collegiate Alchemy, right? So we would go and do private parties for people and basically be bartenders for hire kind of thing. So me and a couple of buddies, and we figured out, okay, you go rent glasses here, for $1 a glass and charge $2 a glass. And then, okay, here's the, hourly rates and all these different things. So it was like, okay, you go and make $300-400 a night at one of these parties, which is like 3 hours long. Whereas if you bartend for 8 hours, you make $300, right? Kind of thing. So I was always hustling, kind of a little bit of thinking about different ways. I mean, my friend Dave Snelling, right? So Dave and I, in some period there, we started a business called Squeaky Clean Window Cleaning. And we were going around with ladders to people's residence houses and cleaning windows, right? So we were always kind of hustling and kind of, even younger, right? Mowing lawns, shoveling snow. Does anyone do that anymore? Do kids do
shoveling? That? Yeah, I think shoveling snow and mowing lawns. I think I think it depends. Like maybe if they're from families like ours, that like that's how you made like paper routes. Like that was kind of how you made your money. But I would definitely say like around here anyway, the boys will go around and like try to shovel someone's driveway.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see that a whole lot in my neighborhood or for my kids.
Yeah.
They got bubble.
Yeah, the bubble. Okay, so you had an entrepreneurial spirit, probably, and I'm interested too on the competitive side. So we'll talk about that because I think that fits into the sales type world, and so we can talk a little bit about that in terms of does that like from the athlete in you, is there something connection there? So then, so at what point, like how old were you when you decided to go back to school?
25.
And you
decided it was probably 24, but then I went back at 25.
To VCU.
VCU. Yeah.
And you're paying for that on your own?
Paying for that on my own.
Because the first time, like even though you were committed and you knew this is what you were going to do, you didn't try to go back to the rents and say, hey, why don't you hook me up? Or was that not even?
No, I had saved up some money. Yeah. And then that got me, I think, my first semester. And then I applied for student loans and all that stuff. And then I was working the whole time. So.
And living in Richmond? Is that?
And living in Richmond, West End.
And then you were, your degree is in business?
My degree is in criminal justice.
Ah. Yeah. Tell me about that.
REAL-ATABLE is sponsored by TFA Soft Skills, your one-stop shop for workshops, coaching, speaking, and soft skills development. If you'd like to hire Teresa, visit www.tfasoftskills.com for more information.
I knew I didn't want to, my little stint with being a broker, great practical experience, but, dialing for dollars was not my thing, Yeah. So, and who's going to listen to a 20, 21-year-old kid anyway, calling me. Right. But I always had an interest in criminal justice. I got turned on to at Nova because there were some criminal justice classes and it solved some elective or whatever. And I took it. I had a really good professor there that was kind of motivating. I think we did some class on gangs or something like that, which was cool. Yeah. And VCU had a really good criminal justice program. And I had a friend of mine who was down there getting his master's. And so it kind of just worked out. I wanted to kind of go into intelligence or go into law enforcement or something like that. Okay. I thought at that time. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. And then so then you graduated, and then what was your first job out of school?
Well, so I got out of college and I applied everywhere, right? I applied to Secret Service, FBI.
And you had some connections at CIA,
Yeah,
right? So
applied to Langley, applied to a number of others, right? And then, there's a long weeding out process in those things, but I made it through most cases. And then the last step is really doing a background investigation, which takes a long time. It still takes a long time. So in the meantime, it's like, okay, what are you going to do? So I answered an ad, I think. It wasn't online. It had to have been in the paper or something like that, right? So there was a recruiter that was looking for people to do IT stuff, right? I can't remember exactly. So I answered his ad. They set interview up for me at a company called DLT Solutions. And I went in there and I met this amazing guy named Craig Abod, who was the co-founder of DLT. And he sat down and we talked and we joked around and talking about movies and this and that. I was like, that's a cool guy and really smart. And and so he explained the job to me. It was basically calling government customers and pitching them on different vendors, right? Or trying to set meetings up. So at that point I was like, okay, this sounds cool, right? Looked around the office, there's a bunch of younger people like me. So I got into it, and by the time any of the places I applied called me back, I'd been there for like 9 months, and I'd made like twice what I would have made in the government, in that first year. And that tells you something right there. I think it's a great weeding out process, right? Rather go stand somewhere and take a bullet for, I think at the time it was $28K. I'm over here making more than that. And I was like, okay, I'm money motivated and that type of thing. But I liked IT. I liked technology in general. Can't use it. I just sell it. Right? So
you can use it better than me, given the passcode exchange earlier.
Anyway, so the rest is honestly history. I mean, then I was there for a while, and I left because I found out this other person who didn't work nearly as hard as me was making more money than me, and that kind of pissed me off. And I'm like, okay. So I started looking around, and I went to the next place and like kind of doubled up, right? So went from here to here, did that for like 3 years, and then did the next thing, and it was just kind of this this ramp, where.
So let's talk about the money piece. And is that, I guess the question I have now that you've been at this for a while, is that still the motivator? And at like what point, I guess from a money perspective, is there something where do you feel like, okay, now I've been successful, right? Like is there some sort of mark, right? Like you think of like an athlete going professional, or you think about people in the entertainment industry and they get their first big check from a movie, right? So I'm curious for you, like at what point were you like, okay, this is kind of where I'm supposed to be, and I feel like I've been a success at this, and now you're motivated maybe by some other things. We'll talk about what those are.
I think the success bar moves, right?
Yeah.
So when I thought I was successful when I bought my first condo.
Yeah.
Right? $150K, and you move in, you're on your own, like, okay, I've got a mortgage now, and like, okay, I'm successful.
Right.
Like, and then, I think later on, the bar moved again, like, okay, well now I've got a wife and kids, and I've got a job I like, and now I'm successful, right? So I don't know, to answer your question, the money side, early on, and it was the money for sure, right? It was important for me to make a living and to be kind of financially stable. And maybe that's why I got married late in life too, right? Because I didn't want to have the worry about, paying for kids and all these other things. So I wanted to have kind of a good nest egg before I actually got married.
Wanted to have things like the security in place.
The security, right?
Yeah.
And, so that was probably one of the reasons I got married late in life too, or later on.
Well, I don't know. I guess by all accounts, like I was almost, I think I was 30 when I got married. So how old were you?
37.
Yeah, so a little bit later. But don't you feel like you know who you are?
For sure.
I'm a believer in it takes time to figure that out, right?
Well, I've been a terrible young dad.
Right.
Terrible, right? It's like, look at guys were 21 to 25 and they
Right.
had kids. I'm like, oh, I don't know how you're doing that.
Right.
I mean, with the stress of like trying to figure out like how you can provide.
Right.
Right.
And kind of be in the world, right? And
be in the world
yeah.
and like, okay, you don't even know what you want to do at 25. Most people don't. It's like, okay, how am I going to have a wife and kids and all these different things, or partner and kids, whatever it is.
Right.
So
right.
it's just, I don't know, that's more stress than I want.
On the just in terms of you being successful, like once you got into that field of work and you felt like you liked IT and clearly you were good at selling. So talk a little bit about what makes someone good at that, right? Like what has contributed to your success?
I think listening. So it goes back to the whole bartender analogy, right? Because a lot of people, when they sit at a bar, they want to talk, they want someone to listen to them, and I was always pretty good at that. So you get build up regulars and stuff like that. I honestly, so my motivation was to help people and to solve problems, right? So that, I'm wired that way for whatever reason. I like to do that.
Yeah.
And so that works very well in that industry. If you're interested in solving problems, if you're really you listen to what the problem is, because sometimes people think there's a problem, but it's not really the real problem, it's something else. And so you have to listen for that, and you have to understand, okay, you know, what your outcome that you're looking for is not based on what you think the problem is, it's something else, right? And so to be able to kind of, again, just listen to people and say, okay, and ask questions, and understand, you know, what it is they're going through, from an IT perspective or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my motivation, and if you make money along the way, then that's even better, you know.
Right. And then how many times have you changed organizations, like since you started? Because is it?
Like 8?
That's pretty wild. So is that common in your field?
Yeah, I mean, some of those were acquisitions, right? You get, company buys out your company, and then, you know, either you go off and work at that new company, or you go off and work somewhere else.
Right.
It's not that uncommon. Sometimes you're a victim of your own success too, right? Where, okay, you have a territory that you're covering, and you do your job and you sell that territory, you have nothing else to sell. It's like, okay, what am I going to do now? You know, sometimes the expectations on you grow so rapidly that it's unattainable, so you have to go somewhere else. Or sometimes you just don't like the people you're working with or who you're working for, and you go somewhere else.
Do you feel like for that many moves, I'm curious about your tolerance of risk, right? Because you talked about being so, you know, kind of wanting to build that nest egg and then have that financial security, and to be successful at these different organizations. And then like every time you move, right, it's like you've spent time building relationships, you've spent time cultivating for you clients, I'm guessing, right? So like there's an element of risk, right, each time you move, or is it you just, you know, the situations that are the right situations to be successful, and when you spot that that's not going to happen, you cut and run?
Yeah. So I think, especially in IT, I'm not sure I know other verticals that are as similar, but in the IT space, it is not uncommon to have multiple jumps, right? I mean, I think I'm actually on the low end.
Really?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it spans 30 years now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm probably on the low end of the, you know, people in this industry who do what I do tend to bounce around. You know, it's usually a 3-year run here or a 5-year run there if you're lucky. Sometimes it's only a year. You know. How
much stress is involved in the type of work that you do, right? A lot of stress.
So if you work for especially a publicly traded company, right? So there's an expectation to hit numbers, right? You have shareholders to answer to, and it's a kind of a team collective, right? So it's all who's rowing, who's not, kind of thing. So there's a lot of stress, and we basically run our business. You know, we look at it from a quarterly, from an annual, from a multi-year business, right? So we try and project out 36 months, but we're really focused on the next 90 days, right, in between quarters, or during each quarter. So you project what your where you're going to end for that quarter,
Mm-hmm.
and then give guidance for the next quarter, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot. It's a tremendous. It's not for the faint of heart. This is not It's not a business, and you can kind of fake it for a while. I think in sales in general, some people just have the personality. They can go out and they can be moderately successful. I equate it to going to college, right? Like if you showed up for class in college, you kind of guaranteed a C, right? Same thing with sales. If you show up, it's like, okay, if you're actually doing some part of work, you're going to do okay. Mm-hmm. And by okay, that's, much better than 90% of the rest of the people in the world.
Right.
Because of, the salaries and commissions and stuff like that are in this field.
So let's talk about, before we talk about your current role, because I know a little bit, but not a lot. And I think it's going to dovetail this other thing I want to talk to you about. But like in terms of your last role before where you are now, mm-hmm. just by like talking with Sue, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was very stressful for you, right? So in terms of the I guess the exit of that situation, so just talk a little bit about how do you manage that, right? Because of all that pressure to deliver and to it's so cutthroat, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, as someone who's in HR and has had to manage employee issues across the gamut, when it comes to salespeople, it was actually, from an HR perspective, a little bit easier, because mm-hmm. it's very clear, either you did it or you didn't do it. There's not a lot of behavioral nuance. Mm-hmm. It's either so from that perspective, I like the transparency and the clarity. It's either you did it or you didn't, but then obviously the pressure of what that brings, of if you don't do it or you can't do it, and there's nowhere else to point, right? It's kind of so how do you deal with that stress, or how do you manage that? Or when you talk about being resilient, what are some of the ways that you do that?
So I think first of all, it's perfectly fine to fail. Mm-hmm. You're going to have, there's no one in my industry who's successful all the time.
Yeah.
You're going to have bad quarters, bad years. The important part is to keep kind of moving forward. Mm-hmm. And if you're introspective enough where you can understand why you weren't successful.
Yeah.
The people I admire in my business are the ones that have a plan and try and execute on that plan, but then they go back and they rejigger that plan because mm-hmm. something's not working or something is. So I think life is a roller coaster. I mean, It is, right? There's ups and downs. When your professional life is hitting a high, your personal life is going in a ditch, and trying to find that equilibrium between the two sometimes can be challenging. But the point is, in both, you just kind of keep moving forward. Yeah. And you keep, don't dwell on the past too much. Learn from the past, but don't mm-hmm. dwell on it. And try and keep, try and keep a positive attitude as much as you can.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of.
Do you think that? Let's talk a little bit about the competitive nature of it, right? Mm-hmm. Given that, you have that background.
Yeah.
Is that a motivator too? Is there still something in you that's I wanna beat that? Whatever it's self-imposed, right? It can be self-imposed goals or
right.
Or whether you actually have competitors in your field that you're we want to beat that.
Kill them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Absolutely. That's a huge motivator for me. I personally like the hunt, kind of the chasing the customer, talking to them.
Like
working.
Dating?
I'm talking business here, but anyway, so... Yeah, I like the hunt. I like going and targeting the right customers mm-hmm. and understanding what they do, what motivates them, what are their priorities, those types of things. Going in and talking to them and saying, okay, here's let me talk to you about your issues, hearing what they're saying, and then have a response to that. And hopefully it's something that they think and agree with.
And along the way, have you felt confident about what it is that you're offering? I suspect or is there times when you haven't and you've had to
Yeah. So I guess there's not I think you have to believe in what you're selling, mm-hmm. and if you don't, you have to be a really good liar.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm just not.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to believe in the technology. I have to see it work. I'm very careful about when I go out and interview, and I don't just take the word of the person I'm talking to at the company. I go out and talk to customers, I talk to partners, I talk to other people who have experience with that technology and get their feedback, right? Because that's where you really uncover the truth.
Yeah.
So
in terms of what you're going to experience.
In terms of what you're going to experience. Yeah. So yeah, I think.
Let's talk about your sojourn. So like you left before you started at this organization, you went and did this cool.
The sabbatical.
Yeah, I want to tell me about that. Tell me about your decision to take a sabbatical and what you did with that time.
Yeah. So
that's not entirely normal, right?
No, it's not. Yeah. I mean, and this is life lessons, right? You shouldn't ever make decisions for money, right? As the primary decision maker. It's obviously a factor, but it's not the primary. It shouldn't be the primary one. The last job I had, I was in it for about 3 months, and I was going to leave, right? And then I was going to go tell my boss, who was a friend of mine who I worked for before, and said, look, this isn't for me. This is not working out, kind of thing. And then I don't want to get into too much detail, but he gave me some specifics on he told me something before I had a chance to tell him, and I did the mental math in about 3 seconds and said, oh, okay, well, I guess I can gut it out for a year, kind of thing. And that was the wrong mistake, because I was motivated by money, right? And I shouldn't have done it. I should have left. And that next year took a huge mental toll on me. And I don't know why it just did. And so I started planning for the sabbatical. I knew it was coming. I knew I wasn't going to be there very long. So I started kind of just putting money aside, and started thinking about what I was going to do during this time. And just kind of karmically, my brother-in-law called me up and said, hey, we're doing this big hike in Wyoming. Would you be interested? And I'm like, sure. Without even knowing anything about it. And then it was so funny. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, and my boss at the time, we had a Zoom call, and I joined, and I wasn't on video or I was on mute too. And I see the HR guy pop up. And I start screaming at my wife. I go, I'm getting fired. This is awesome, right? And she comes in. We're all jumping up. She knew how miserable I was, right? Yeah. So I was just so excited. It was perfect timing too. It was so I was ecstatic, right? I mean, how many times you hear about people ecstatic about getting fired? I was ecstatic. It was fantastic. And so I went off, and I started executing my sabbatical plan, which kind of hard to fill up 6 months, right? That was my plan, to do 6 months. And so started working out, started training for this big hike. The hike was in Wyoming, called the Wind River. High Route, the Wind River High Route is what it's called. Andrew Skirka, for those of you who know who he is. Anyways, my brother called and asked if I want to do this. I said yes, and started looking into it, and it's really physically challenging, right? So you have to carry 12 days of food on tents and all this stuff. It's like you're out in the wilderness.
And you're not really, but prior to this, like, would you say you're a big outdoor, adventure guy? It's not.
I mean, outdoor if you mean the Ritz, right?
You're right.
I was good at that.
Yeah.
But one of the things on my list during my sabbatical is I want to make myself uncomfortable. I had lots of ideas on how to do that, but that happened just to be jumped kind of out at me. I'm not a big camper. I do like it now, by the way, but
really?
At the time I hadn't done much camping. Certainly not much backpacking where you're carrying food and stuff like that. So that was kind of fun, right? So you have to go and plan this thing out, and there's a ton of preparation that goes with it. Physically, you have to go get in shape and all these things, but then you have to buy the right gear, which is the fun part, right? You spend a lot of money on things that you use.
Gadgets,
exactly. Yeah. So really enjoyed that, and I did this with my brother-in-law, so that was great because we'd have Zoom calls.
Were you guys already pretty close, or did you really get close after this experience? You know what I mean? Shared experience.
My brother-in-law, two of my brother-in-laws and my nephew live in Hawaii, so I don't get to see them very often. But when we do see them, I have a great time. Love them; they're great human beings. My other brother-in-law lives not that far along, and we actually used to work together. And he and I are close. Yeah. So that was great. So I'm doing this thing with a bunch of my really cool people and people I really like. So that was easy. but yeah, it was a great adventure, and it was
How long are you out there for?
we were out there for 12 days.
And how, like, what was the, give us some highlights.
If you'd like to advertise with REAL-ATABLE, please email us at info@tfasoftskills.com for more information.
The first day we hiked for 15 miles in the rain. That wasn't so bad. You're kind of still motivated and kind of excited.
Yeah.
And then I'll make a long story short, but the first peak we had to climb, we didn't get there till later in the day, whatever day it was the second day. So we had to camp at the bottom of it and then climb it the next morning, which we did. Beautiful day, nice clear skies. There were lots of fires out that kind of Tahoe, California area, and we'd see some of that smoke, but it was just perfectly clear. And so it takes about 5 hours to climb up this peak, right? Which you're going from, I don't know, 10,500 up to like 13,500, right? But it's like this. And so all the way going up, and it's great. It's hard, but it's just, you're going uphill, right? Just before you get to the very top, all hell breaks loose. And this huge storm comes in, all this hail, and wind is gusting like 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, and we're at the top of this peak. And now we have to go down the other side. You can't camp up there, you have to go down the other side. And so we hunkered down for like, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes to an hour trying to let the storm pass, and it didn't. It just kept coming. And so we finally decided, okay, we just got to go. We got to get away, get down, right? Worst case, we have to just get down somewhere where we could set up camp and get warm again. And I'm thinking, what the hell did I sign up for? Like,
why did I do this voluntarily?
So when you're going down, it's hard enough going up, but going down when there's snow and ice and stuff like that on all these rocks that you have to climb over, I'm a big fat guy, so it's like, okay, like,
you are
any one slip at the top of this thing, and
curtains.
Well, I mean, it's like you're stuck up there, and then I don't know how I mean, we had like emergency beacons and stuff like that, but like, who's going to come get you in that, right?
Right.
So I think worst case scenario, you're probably stuck up there for a day,
right?
With a broken ankle or whatever, and just ruins the trip for everyone. So I had those moments, and after, and plus you're at altitude, so you're
not feeling well,
not feeling well. It's like, it's really hard to kind of breathe and stuff like that. But
is it the most physically demanding thing you've ever done?
Yeah.
And were you prepared, like, in terms of the working out and the prep you had done? Like, did you feel like you had done enough, or was there like, could you?
I know that I did the right things, right?
Really?
I was doing a lot of hiking and putting rucksacks on. You know what a rucksack is?
Like backpack.
It's like a weighted,
okay.
like either weighted vest or a weighted pack. And I was doing a bunch of hikes, but it was all flat. And I do stairs and stuff like that. Finally, my wife suggested I get on the treadmill and turn the incline up, which that was what I should have been doing the whole time.
Just to get that vertical.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can really train for the altitude, like the lack of oxygen. Not practically anyway.
Yeah.
But you have to focus on cardio.
Did you have to do a lot of like digging deep to like get through stuff? Like in terms of just like that emotional fortitude of like, because you kind of like, you have your buddies there, but at the end of the day, it's on you to get you from point A to point B. Right?
Yeah, there's moments like, especially, so a lot of these, like we'd go through these passes, right? So peak here, and there'd be a pass in between. And it sounds like, oh, it's a pass.
Yeah.
No, it's like really steep and it's hard. And then you get to, the top of the pass, and then it's like, now you're going down the other side. Going down the other side was almost harder. It's just harder on your knees, and like, you also don't have the stability that you do going up, right?
Yeah, and you got like all your stuff, right? All your gear. So the weight of like
40 pounds on your back, and it's like, okay. So it was physically it was exhausting, but usually on the downhill slopes, it was more mentally exhausting because you're watching every foot.
Yeah. You had mentioned before we started this that it was transformational. Just talk for a minute about what like in terms of the Greg before and Greg after. What do you think? How did it impact you?
Well, I think
outside of that kind of physical.
I think the year leading up to that
Yeah.
was a bit transformational as well. Like, again, I said early on, like, I could gut this out, you know, and that was work, right? Gut anything out for a year was my mentality, but I didn't realize how big a toll it played on me. But that was more like I can get anything out from a physical standpoint, right? And all my brother-in-laws are in much better shape than I am, and you know, I would tell them, I was like, I'll be the last guy, but I'll get there, right? Eventually I'll get there, kind of thing, right? So just putting one foot in front of the other, and just like, okay, you know, timing your breaths and doing all those things. But so I think the life lesson, or if anything I learned from it, is like, just, you know, you don't have to go 100 miles an hour. You can go at a snail's pace or your pace or whatever, and you can still get to the same goal.
How does it feel to go back after having that break? That's 6 months.
Yeah, no.
Were you ready?
Yeah. You know,
did you start to get bored?
I started to get
not bored, but maybe like need a purpose, need a mission.
Intellectually curious, right? This is what I said. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not. The thing I missed the most was the interaction with all the different people, and I didn't have that as much. I was still having lots of lunches with friends and things like that, but I wanted to go back into, you know.
Did you think about starting your own business?
I did, yeah. I came really close.
So what was the like deciding factor to not do that?
I mean, you know, I was talking to there's a lady who works at Google who I really love and respect and think she's great, and I want to go work for her. And then I was talking to her, and then I went on this hike and I listened to this podcast. Can I say the name of the podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, it's called 20 Minute VC. You ever heard of it? Anyway, so I listened to this podcast, and they were interviewing George Kurtz, who's the CEO of my company now. And I knew CrowdStrike. I knew some people over there. I certainly knew the technology a little bit, but I didn't know George. And I started listening to this podcast, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool guy. Like, he's not your typical kind of IT CEO. Super smart, yeah, but that's not his whole shtick. He's like, you know, not one-sided, I guess, and you know, myopic in terms of what he's doing. He's got all these other things he's doing as well. So I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I make a mental note to make some inquiries, kind of thing. The next day, I get a call, and it's from It's from a friend who knows this other guy we know, who's saying, hey, just so you know, it looks like they're looking for somebody, and you should reach out. I'm like, oh, okay. And I was like, this is karma. Yeah. Right? So that's kind of how it worked out, right? So I put Google on hold, but I was going to I was going to start a reseller. Yeah. A government reseller, kind of where I got my start.
Oh, interesting.
And just kind of really, really niche, like be focused kind of on cybersecurity specifically and nothing else. Okay. So. All
right. I know you have somewhere to be. So just two things. One, you've talked a little bit about it. I'm wondering if there's anything else. You mentioned listening and active listening, right? I've talked a lot about soft skills on here. So from your life experience and the work that you do, is there anything else that you would say outside of, which is my favorite actually, is active listening? But if you think about influence and collaboration and just communication in general, or anything that you see there in your teams, right, that helps them to be successful in the soft skill space, what would you say is like one or two of the most critical that you believe are important?
So I've had this conversation with a lot of my peers, right? We joke like, you know, what are your hobbies? I was like, I don't have any hobbies. Like, can't really call golf a hobby. I guess you could, but I don't play it enough to call it a hobby. Right. So we said, okay, you know, outside of like going out to meet people and have lunches and happy hours and stuff like that, like, what do you do? It's like, well, I don't know. Like, I collect friends, kind of things. Like, I collect acquaintances. I think it's really important. And sorry, not answering the question correctly, but from a soft skill perspective, yes, active listening is huge. There's the point I was trying to make poorly was that it's not. I don't think it's true that you are born with curiosity or not, right? There's been a big question I've been asking myself. Like, I never felt like I was a very curious person. How does this work? How do you do that? Because I think those people are the tinkerers, right? And then the ones who fail often, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to do this, and they fail, right? Like baking or woodworking or whatever it might be. They're curious about how that gets done. Right. But if you're not curious, you're not going to do it, right? So I've always felt like I wasn't all that curious. Like I was kind of okay, this is who I am or whatever. But I think lately, I've certainly over the last couple of years, I've become much more curious. Like I am wondering, okay, how does that work? How does this microphone actually work? And why is it pointed this way, not that way, and all these different things. Kind of a stupid thing. I get no, why is it pointed but in terms of, and so I think being curious, and that can
love that.
Show up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like, you're sitting there wondering about this or that. It could be like, just look at something and say, okay, well, how's that made? Why does it work that way? Or why does that person think this way or whatever, and trying to drill down to it.
And it sounds like too, just being curious beyond your own interests, like beyond your own scope of what you know and what you want.
It's so easy. It's like, we talk about, I don't know if this could parallel, but like, we're bombarded with stuff from both sides of the aisle these days, right? And I was having this nice conversation with this lady, and she was saying how she makes it a point to watch like Fox News and CNN. She listens to BBC and Al Jazeera. She listens, all these different things,
right?
Because she doesn't want to she wants to get information from all sides and then have it informed, be able to make an informed decision based off of that. I think that's very true in, for a lot of different things, right? I mean, I think you want to be, I like watching baseball all the time or something like, maybe it's a bad example, but you love baseball, but hey, why don't you look at hockey too, or try that out? Or, I like to cook brownies. Let me make chocolate cookies.
I like it. Diversify. All right. And then the last thing I would ask you is around the advice that you would give your younger self, given the path that you have taken. And a lot of people say, and I agree with this, right? I wouldn't necessarily change anything because it's made me who I am, and a believer in that things happen for a reason. And I definitely believe that. I also think that you can give counsel that maybe it would have made it a little bit easier, or, something that now with the experience that you had and the life experience, maybe someone similar to you at that kind of 20 to 25 age, right? What would you tell them, or what would you tell young Greg to kind of make things a little bit easier?
I don't think I would tell myself to be more considerate. Like I think my younger Greg was not as good a version as my older Greg.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of people feel that way, but I think I was in a hurry in a lot of cases, right? I do things, but how you treat people is very important. And I probably didn't treat people the best way when I was younger, or as best I could have.
Right.
Whereas now, so I think that's something that I would tell myself.
Yeah. I so appreciate that. And I should say, for the record, you were so kind when Paul was going through his stuff, and you were always checking in with me and sent us some stuff. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. See, you are very considerate. You matured. Thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate it. You were great. Thank you, Greg. I really can't thank you enough. I have been asking you to do this podcast with me for a long time, because I feel like you're such a great example of someone who's had to pivot and make a lot of changes as you've navigated your career. So I really appreciate your time. Loved your candor and your vulnerability about being aimless and then figuring out your path. I loved what you said early on in the interview about active listening and how that's been a critical skill for you to be successful. I could totally agree. Active listening is my favorite of all the soft skills. And then really, I appreciate your counsel and your advice on how, when you throughout your life had made decisions solely based on money, how they didn't necessarily work out the way that you wanted them to. So I just appreciate all that counsel and great advice. Thank you to Missy and Hannah for your support in producing this episode. And thank you to our Relatable community, as always, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and conversation, please take a moment and subscribe either on YouTube or your favorite listening platform. Relatable is sponsored by TFA Soft Skills. You can find more information about Relatable and our sponsor at www.tfasoftskills.com. Until next time, this is Teresa Freeman with Relatable. Stay connected.